YouTube animators are sometimes some of the hardest working creators on the platform, creating the highest quality content, spending hundreds of hours molding their craft to utter perfection. Other times though, they're lustful lolly enjoyers and talentless manipulators. Guess what kind of animators we're going to be talking about today? In this video, we're going to go through just a few of the scandals, conflicts, and controversies of YouTube's most famous and infamous animators. I'm going to start off with some tamer stories, and as the video progresses, we'll get into the more insane and dark tales. With that said, let's begin with, in terms of metrics, one of the most downfallen YouTube animators. Back in the mid-2010s, YouTube animation was really starting to kick off, and several recognizable names would make their debuts on the platform, including the likes of The Odd Ones Out, Tim Tom, Erod Story, and Jaiden Animations. And one common denominator between all of these guys, and many other YouTube animators, is that initially they don't always like to show their face. Here's a small tip to any aspiring YouTubers that are watching this video. Audience members, for the most part, like to know what their favourite creators look like, because it helps them forge a connection with them. For most genres of content, you're generally expected to be on camera, but for storytime animators, it works a little bit differently. You see, for them, having a face reveal is more seen as optional than mandatory, and that's because they already have a face of the channel that's going to be their character. For that reason, many of them just never face reveal. Now, there are countless reasons behind why someone would feel uncomfortable to have their face on camera, but I think that in general, if someone chooses not to have their face out there, then that needs to be respected. And using the case of Jaiden Animations' face reveal as an example, I think that the vast majority of people, or at the very least the vast majority of Jaiden Animation fans, agree with me. So if you don't know this story, Jaiden was one such animator that, at first, didn't have her face out there. If you've been a long-time fan of hers, then you might know that especially early on in her days on YouTube, she struggled quite heavily with her body image. I've discussed her song Empty in collaboration with Boy in a Band several times on the channel by this point, but long story short, she had an eating disorder and severe issues with her appearance. She would discuss these issues within her video Why I Don't Have a Face Reveal, released in April 2017. And it was within that video that she'd tell an unsettling story from VidCon 2016. If you don't know VidCon, it's probably the largest convention for YouTube and content creation. Back in 2016, Jaiden agreed to attend, but there was one small problem. She hadn't face revealed yet. On top of that, according to Jaiden, at this point in her life, her satisfaction with her body was at an all-time low. For months, she had been starving herself and treating herself worse than poorly. But she told everyone that she was going to attend, and she felt an obligation to stay true to her word. So, according to Jaiden, she put on a brave face and went. This is how she described it in her video.
I didn't want to let people down by breaking my promise to be there, and I wanted to see all my friends and supporters, but I was in such a terrible state. I didn't know what I was gonna do. I was panicking, I wasn't ready, I wasn't back to normal yet, but I was approaching so quickly and there wasn't any time to go back. I told myself this was my punishment. I did this to myself. So I put on a mask and pretended to be fine.
But then, something happened that would lead to a decade of controversy. Obviously, with VidCon being a creator event, a lot of people that go there want to make content out of it. And especially in the mid-2010s when the genre was at its high, some people would vlog. But with this came a problem, because Jaiden soon realised that her face was going to be in the vlog of a YouTuber that she attended the con with, and according to her, she pled with him to have her face edited out.
I messaged the person who was taking a lot of video footage and asked them if I could censor my face out. I'm not going to mention who this person is because that detail doesn't add anything to this story, and I don't think it would benefit anyone if I did.
She even offered to edit it for this creator, and he agreed. However, upon receiving the edited footage, he decided to release the uncensored, original version. Flash forward to Jaiden's video, while he was unnamed in it, upon hearing a description of this unnamed YouTuber, fans were quick to piece the clues together and soon realised that the content creator she was talking about was another YouTube animator known as Alex Clark. Now, here's where things get interesting, because upon the internet agreeing that it was Alex Clark that Jaiden was talking about, he was essentially shunned by many of her fans and many fans of the storytime animation genre. In theory, this should be the kind of controversy that would eventually blow over. You would expect him to be plagued by it for maybe a few weeks or maybe a month or two, but according to Alex, he has been dogged by hate by Jaiden animation fans for several years now. Years on from when this controversy first began. 6 years since Jaiden Animation's video about it, Alex Clark would finally make a response in a video titled VidCon 2016 Explained. Within this video, he would finally reveal his side of the story, and made the claim that he didn't know the severity of Jaiden's situation. He made the point that he wasn't the first person to include Jaiden's face in his content, and claimed that he thought that he and Jaiden were friends prior to Jaiden's video.
There are claims that I doxed Jaiden by being the first big YouTuber to post her face. This is false. As an example, at the time I had 200,000 subscribers, and a week before my video went live, a channel with 1 million subscribers posted a video that featured Jaiden. As far as I know, the only channel Jaiden had issues with was me. If you'd like more details, I'll put an explanation on the screen which you can read.
Alex's response was received very poorly, only receiving 4.7 thousand likes compared to 12,000 dislikes. It's now been 2.5 years since Alex's response, and some of you watching this might be thinking that I'm just reopening old wounds. Because that should be the end of it, right? Well, I thought so too. Until I looked in the comment section and saw that Alex Clark has been responding to criticisms ever since this video came out, even as recently as 1 month ago. This isn't something that Jaiden's fans have forgotten, and it's not something that Alex has either. As you've seen, and as you'll continue to see throughout the rest of this video, YouTube animators can be cancelled for all sorts of reasons. When it comes to our next animator though, by far the largest that we'll be discussing today, he was cancelled at the very start of this year for some absolutely reprehensible business practices. So what happens when greed corrupts a YouTuber? Let's find out. Nutshell Animations is a very large TikTok and YouTube channel, which uploads, as their name would suggest, animation content. In particular, their bread and butter are animated shorts, where they'll take popular audio, which isn't theirs mind you, and then animate it, with several of these videos receiving view counts in the tens of millions. In fact, almost every single one of their shorts will receive at least 1 million views. I painstakingly counted all of the videos with more than 1 million views, and the number is roughly 1,830, leading Nutshell to have received over 10 billion views. For context, Jaiden Animations and The Odd Ones Out, arguably the two largest animation channels, have 8 billion views combined. Now granted, the vast majority of Nutshell Animations views come through shorts, which is another ballgame entirely to long-form content. But even still, this channel is extremely lucrative. Especially given the channel's rate of upload, you would expect it to have a few animators on the payroll, and you would expect them to be compensated fairly for their work. It's no secret that hand-drawn animation is tough work, and it takes a lot of time. Even a simple 60-second clip could take literally hours to make. But Nutshell, according to several different animators that have previously worked for them, do not pay their workers a fair wage whatsoever. But to fully understand the allegations levied against Nutshell, we have to go back to a Bedo999 video where he just reacted to Nutshell's work and called it cringy. However, in the comment section of that video came a comment that caught Bedo's eye and caused him to make a follow-up. An animator of the name Robotic Turtle claimed that they used to work for Nutshell and was paid $50 to animate his shorts. This is insane, considering that these shorts, A, are of a generally high animation quality. They're fairly fluid, and you can tell that a lot of time has been put into them, and for that reason, B, they take a long time to make for each animator. If you're putting a decent amount of time into it to make sure that these animations are of the highest quality possible, $50 is going to be paying most of these animators less than minimum wage. And this is even worse considering that the comment claimed that the channel's monthly take-home is $234,000. If that figure is accurate, $50 per animation is absolutely despicable. In total, 3 animators reached out to Beto. For context, I'm taking his figures. So the first one that reached out generated 84 million views for Nutshell throughout 23 videos and was paid $1,200 for his efforts. It's estimated that these videos would have made Nutshell $12,000, so they made about 10% of the overall gross. However, the animator claimed that they had worked for 184 hours on these videos, so their pay worked out to just $6.50 an hour. In contrast, another animator received roughly $34 an hour. However, their animations were done in only 88 hours and on average generated less views for the channel, so Nutshell is rewarding laziness. Rewarding laziness isn't a crime, but at least for me, this is a critique of their business model. Worse yet, keep this in mind. If the person behind Nutshell doesn't do their own animation, and if the audio for their videos is taken from other sources, then what do they actually do? The answer: nothing. The person behind Nutshell is potentially getting $200,000 plus a month for giving the most bare bones basic prompts you would ever hear. It appears as though the person or people behind Nutshell don't do anything. So you would imagine that they would have a lot of time on their hands. Perhaps they could spend that time to devise a way to fairly pay their animators and reward hard work. But it doesn't even end there, because Beto continued to dig and discovered some fairly unethical business practices which have painted Nutshell animations out to be quite malicious and vindictive. First of all, the animators were never credited for their work. I think this would have been quite nice for Nutshell to do, considering that these videos are entirely made by the animators. Nutshell even went as far as to tell off one of the animators that were responding to positive comments praising his animations, because according to Nutshell, apparently it ruins the illusion, I guess? Realistically, I think that Nutshell just doesn't want the audience to know that it's not actually the person behind the channel who's doing the work. I'm not a fan of this whatsoever, but it's nowhere near as serious as the next revelation, as Beto went on to reveal that Nutshell often hires teenage animators. One of the animators that Beto spoke to was just 15. And here's the thing. If a YouTube channel reaches out to a teenage animator, especially a YouTube channel that's doing the numbers that Nutshell Animations is, it would be very, very easy for them to manipulate or pull strings to get the 15-year-old to do basically anything they want. I could imagine that 9 times out of 10, a 15-year-old, especially one that hasn't had work like this before, would see this as their ticket to the big time, and they would accept any offer that's thrown in front of them, even if it's a bad one, like $50 for a finished project. The chances are that they'll struggle more to say no, that they'll be less likely to know their worth compared to someone older, and just generally they'll be easier manipulated and led astray. Especially if you don't have a fair system in place to accurately compensate your employees. Seeking out child labor seems a bit predatory to me. Here's another tip to any aspiring YouTubers who are watching this. If you're ever fortunate enough to have a company that's big enough that you're hiring employees, maybe sort out the pay before you start hiring 15-year-olds. Nutshell Animations is once more back to top-level view counts. The kids that watch his content either don't care, or more likely in my opinion, don't know. And the views keep coming in the tens of millions. But if you want this video to get a view count in the tens of millions, then the best way to do that is by liking it and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Also, let me know down below in the comment section if there are any other animation controversies you'd like to see me cover in a future video. It always sucks when you see a content creator kind of skating by doing no work, and for me personally, I write the videos, I edit them, I record them. Basically everything is done by me, so as an independent creator, any ounce, any molecule or iota of support is genuinely appreciated. With that said though, we're swiftly moving on as things are about to get a lot more taboo. Even more taboo than child labor. We're moving on to an animator who is perhaps a bit too into animation, if you know what I mean. And if you don't, you'll soon see. Let's discuss BenTheLooney. To some, he's YouTube's most controversial cartoonist, or a degenerate YouTube artist. To others, well, he's nothing, because this guy is a fairly niche content creator. For 9 out of 10 people that don't know him for his controversies, the videos they might recognise, if any, was his content discussing annoying McDonald's customers. For context, his videos on this topic were made in the summer of 2016, which seemed to be the summer of YouTube animators just ragging on the annoying interactions they had in their first jobs. BenTheLooney's 2 videos on working at McDonald's have more than 1 million views combined, but his next most popular video has only 126,000 views, and that was made more than 12 years ago. If not for that, you might know him for ranting about kids' cartoons, an activity that he'd take part in any time he got the chance. He's been on YouTube for quite a long time now and has received plenty of critique throughout the years, but none of it would compare to March 2024 after Jormy49's video on him. His video is 51 minutes long, but obviously given its length, you'll understand Ben's story in much more depth than I can give you here. I'll link it down in the description in case you want to go down the BenTheLooney rabbit hole, but be warned, it's ridiculous. Given that many of the accusations and controversies about Ben are now several years old, a lot of them have been deleted or are now lost. For that reason, it's quite difficult for me to supply you with anything that isn't directly ripped from Jormy's video. For the purpose of this video though, I'm going to give you the footnotes and the highlights of what Jormy had to say about Ben. The first, the largest, and the most frequent critique that Ben receives is that this man is a straight up gooner. He's very publicly given his insightful take on Lolicon, which we'll get back to in a moment, and even had an era where his character was straight up naked as the day he was born. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff this guy was making. BenTheLooney is an accurate descriptor.
I'm gonna bring back my critically acclaimed Artist Spotlight series. And today, we have a very obscure artist all the way from Austria in the early 1900s. Let me present to you the wonderful artwork of Adolf Hitler.
And his praise of Hitler's artwork leads me onto another point, that being that many people have accused Ben of racism. Several years ago, Ben made a video about classic cartoons and the racism that's often found within them. Ben was of the opinion that anyone that was offended by these cartoons was just being too sensitive, and because he didn't find them racist, they therefore weren't. Obviously, there was also the Adolf Hitler Artist Spotlight, which I showed you before, but you know, that was a joke. I assume. Upon the cartoon racism video receiving a lot of backlash, Ben eventually took it down. But his opinions on race and racism are absolutely nothing compared to what we're about to discuss next. Because while Adolf Hitler might have been the most controversial person that Ben made an artist spotlight about, he was in good company. Because in the very first episode of the series, Ben decided to dedicate it to the Jeffrey Epstein of YouTube, Shadman. If you don't know Shadman, he is an extremely infamous internet cartoonist. He very often drew lolly content, so characters and even in some instances, real girls that were under the age of 18 in a sexualized manner. He infamously drew an NSFW drawing of Keemstar's daughter, and was a main reason why Chris Tyson was cancelled back in 2024, as the internet discovered that Chris owned a piece of art that was drawn by Shadman. In the fallout of the drama, people were very quick to list everyone even remotely connected to Shadman, and BenTheLooney was one of those people. He gave an artist spotlight to him several years ago, essentially praising his work. And it doesn't stop at Shadman. I mean, there are multiple instances, some of which I'll show you in just a moment, of Ben defending his philosophy that because characters are fictional and not real, even if they are canonically under the age of consent, because they don't actually exist, they're all good and ready to go to be sexualized. I think that one of the main critiques of Ben is that for someone who is so invested in the cartoon medium, he's made hundreds of videos discussing children's cartoon shows, but then he turns around and makes hyper-sexualized content. He very clearly is attracted to several of the characters in these kids shows. So if any kids watch his videos, they're now subjected to him openly gooning.
Well, I miss Valentine's Day, but that's not gonna stop me from celebrating in my own way. And what is that? Drilling over what makes up my whole livelihood. Sexy cartoon gals. Now, this list may include characters that, in the context of the show they come from, are much younger than the age of consent in the real world. However, I must remind you that they exist in a completely different plane than us living, breathing human beings do. In other words, not real. And number 12, we got Velma Dinkley from the Scooby-Doo franchise. Not a bad one to start the list, and an underrated cartoon babe. Next at number 10, a more recent addition to the hot chick list, Enid from OKKO. I mean, damn! How the hell did her character design get approved for a kid's show?
Why, Ben? Why did we need to know which animated 12-year-old gets your dick the hardest, Ben? Why did you feel the need to tell the world? Why was this needed, Ben? Why? You couldn't waterboard that information out of me, man. Why does the internet need to know which underage animated girls from kids shows makes you goon the hardest, dude? Keep it out! But while Ben has undoubtedly gotten the wires crossed between kids animation and adult content, I'd argue that the next creator has gone even further. They've gone so far, in fact, that I won't even be able to show a lot of what I'm discussing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it's pretty bad, and it's utterly disgusting that this kind of thing is allowed on YouTube. In my opinion, they're up there with the most depraved animators this site has ever seen. This is Shappysway, an animated YouTube channel with about 75,000 subscribers as of the time I'm writing this. Now, upon first glance, what do you notice? Probably nothing that bad. It just looks like some sort of children's animated channel. But this channel holds a dark secret, and if you don't know about it yet, it's one that I'm going to expose. This channel is one of the most messed up I've seen in months, and given the nature of my job, that's saying something. Because this channel takes on an art style that is very clearly appealing towards young children, but the content they make is extremely suggestive. Now, from what I've seen, there's nothing exactly explicit here, because if it was actually explicit, the channel would just get terminated. But as I said, the entire thing is extremely suggestive. This is fetish content. I would argue that if there's a young child on YouTube and they're not watching YouTube Kids, what they would see is some of the most suggestive animation I have ever seen wrapped up in a bluey style aesthetic. Now, it's not like the animators here are pretending. It's not like the video starts off with ABCs to hook in the kids, and then when the mum's gone off to the other room, it just starts getting weird and all that. But I think things are even worse because the vast majority of the views that this channel are getting are short form, which means that for a lot of the people watching, they're not seeking it out. It's just coming up there naturally by the YouTube algorithm. Worse yet, most of the comments seem generally supportive. Don't get me wrong, I'm not the first person to talk about Shappysway, and it's not like they don't see any backlash, but for the most part, at least in the videos that I found, they tend to go over well with their deviant audience. My thing is this: why this specific art style? You can make all of the suggestive animated content you want. Go for it. But to wrap it up in a bluey style aesthetic might mean that children are exposed to it. And I have a feeling that that's by design. My question is that out of all the art styles out there, out of the thousands you have to choose from, why would someone want this in particular to be the aesthetic of their suggestive content? Maybe I'm sounding like a Karen or an old man yells at cloud, I don't know, but I think that YouTube needs to be aware of this. I don't think that this sort of thing should be welcome on the platform, and I hope that we can at least put pressure on the company to at least take a look at the channel. Surely this isn't in the community guidelines. The channel is gaining millions of views a month. It's averaging just under 3 million a week. In my opinion, this is a joke, and especially given the recent crackdowns in the world on adult content, I think it's crazy, because this would be so much easier for a child to stumble across than actual adult content where they'd have to probably go and seek it out. This is recommended to them by the YouTube algorithm. If they're on shorts and they're scrolling, it will pop up. And even if they find it through search, it's not like they're going to be looking up adult content. They might just look something up, they see the colourful thumbnail, and they click on it without actually knowing what it is. I don't like to be the judge, jury, and executioner, but I think that this channel needs to go. But if I was the judge, jury, and executioner, I would rule you guys guilty of not checking out my video on Anime Weeb's worst incidents. In that video, I cover the absolutely insane behaviour displayed by the most unhinged fans of the anime genre. I kid you not, the first story in that video almost got me cancelled on Twitter. If you enjoyed this, then I have a sneaky suspicion that that video will be right up your alley. With that said, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.